Thinking Q1, I was easily getting through on that one set of tires, and they pulled me in when I was like 7/10 up. And then I put a new tire on, so I lost the two that I would have, the extra tire that I would have had for Q3. And I think that definitely probably, I would imagine that cost me a couple of tenths probably at the end, going from a used to a new. But nonetheless, it wouldn't have been pole, but so a perfect lap, I probably would have been maybe third or something.
What if I told you that Lewis Hamilton in full Monaco showed that Ferrari could be repeating mistakes that have been costing them for decades? And if he also did it right after a classification where everything seemed to align, until an old weakness exploded again? Lewis Hamilton arrived in Monte Carlo with a mixture of determination, measured optimism, and a deep sense of purpose. He was not the same pilot who debuted with Ferrari in the first races of the season. He was a man who, little by little, began to read the nuances of his new environment. In Isola, he had achieved a 4th place after starting from the 12th position, a comeback that not only talked about his talent, but also of his ability to adapt his style to a car that, at times, was unpredictable. This performance lit a spark of illusion, both within Ferrari's garage and in Lewis himself, which came to say that he felt more connected to the team, which were finally beginning to understand each other. These types of statements are not trivial. When a pilot of his caliber says that, "They have never had someone like me," it is not just about ego or personal marketing. It is an implicit recognition of cultural and operational differences between Mercedes and Ferrari. The Maranello team, accustomed to working under a very particular logic, now had to restructure internal dynamics to take advantage of what Hamilton offers. A meticulous approach, an obsession with detail, and a tactical experience that is not limited to what happens inside the cabin. In other words, Hamilton not only wants to drive fast, he wants to build a winning car. And that demands a systemic transformation. The preparation for Monaco was, according to his own words, more intensive than ever. Ferrari focused his efforts on attacking a structural problem that has been a nightmare throughout the 2025 season: the inability to maximize classification performance. This is something that goes beyond putting soft tires and looking for a quick lap. It requires surgical precision in how the tire temperatures are managed, how the car is aerodynamically loaded in slow sectors, and how the weight is distributed to achieve an efficient energy transfer in the axis. And in a circuit like Monaco, where every millimeter counts, any technical or conceptual failure is magnified. Therefore, Ferrari decided to take a radical step, dusting components of the car of the previous year, specifically the rear spoil of the SF-24, the one who had helped Leclerc to win here in 2024. This was not a simple emergency decision. It was a recognition that the SF-25, with all its novelties, had failed in a key aspect: to offer consistency in high-speed circuits. Not only did they reuse the wing, they also modified the front suspension and expanded the angle of rotation of the front wheels, adapting to the ultra-terraced profile of the Monégasque curves. However, this reactive approach also hid a latent tension. Because if to perform well in Monaco you have to resort to the past, what does that say? And how does that affect the immediate future of a project that aimed to fight for the championship from day one? These technical decisions, although understandable from the point of view of short-term efficiency, showed that Ferrari does not yet trust the base design of the SF-25. And that is a sign that does not go unnoticed by someone like Hamilton, who already lived in his own flesh the consequences of having a badly born car in Mercedes. For all this, Monaco was not just one more challenge in the calendar. It was a fire test. An exam not only of the pilot, but of the team, of the car, and of a philosophy that is still in transition. What began with hope was about to transform into an experience full of frustration, contradictions, and, above all, painful teachings. In the heart of Monte Carlo, where each wall becomes a relentless judge and every centimeter defines success or disaster, the classification is more than a competitive procedure. It is a sentence. In that brutal context, Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton faced a reality that could no longer be hidden. The SF-25, even if it had improved in some aspects, continued to drag fundamental failures that limited their ability to exploit the maximum performance to a single round. Hamilton verbalized it without surroundings: "The classification has been our greatest weakness this year." He did not say it as an emotional criticism, but as a clinical diagnosis. Accurate, undeniable. What aggravates this problem is not only its existence, but its persistence despite the efforts of the team. In theory, Ferrari should have already exceeded these limitations. From before Australia, they had been working obsessively on the management of the tires, trying to find the formula that allowed to reach that optimal temperature window at the right instant. But they have not succeeded. And in Monaco, that detail becomes a potential catastrophe. Because there are no long lines here that allow you to recover the lost. There is no space to hide structural failures. Or the car is perfectly balanced or simply has no choice. Hamilton explained that SF-25 fails to demand maximum performance from tires, and that phrase contains much more than a matter of grip. Talk about a disconnection between the car and the circuit. A communication failure between simulator theory and track practice. And that is not resolved with goodwill or hard work. It requires conceptual redesign. It requires, in many cases, to go back to advance again. This was evidenced when the complete update package that Ferrari brought for Monaco was analyzed. Beyond the rear spoiler inherited from the SF-24, there were mechanical adjustments of high complexity. Parts of the front train were redesigned, suspension geometries were modified, and even the range of movement of the front wheels were extended to adapt to the impossible turns of the Monégasque circuit. But even with all that, the symptoms persisted. Because the problem is not only in mechanics, it is in the total integration of the system. Hamilton acknowledged that it is not the best place to try those things, referring to the fact that Monaco does not forgive experimentation. However, it was inevitable to do it here because the car demanded urgent solutions. But that urgency revealed another type of fracture, a much more silent, that of time and the development approach. Ferrari is caught between its long-term vision and the immediate pressure to deliver results. And that tension directly affects the operability of the weekend. It is no accident that, despite all improvements, the car continued to show inconsistencies in braking, difficulties in heating rear tires, and chronic instability in slow curves. The paradoxical thing is that, in career conditions, the SF-25 has proven to be competitive. But Formula One does not win on Sundays if you fail systematically on Saturdays. And in this sport, leaving from the fourth row is equivalent to giving up victory before starting. Thus, what should have been a step forward ended up functioning as a more precise radiography of the real problem. Ferrari does not yet master its own machine. And Hamilton, who has already lived these situations before, begins to show signs of frustration. Not because it does not believe in the team, but because it begins to see that the solution will be slower, more complex and more structural than many want to accept. And that kind of truth, when they are revealed in full classification of Monaco, weigh like a slab about any attempt to come back. The classification in Monaco is not only a technical and emotional battle. It is also a space where every minimum error acquires monumental proportions. And that was exactly what happened with Lewis Hamilton. After a session where the British had managed to place his Ferrari in a respectable fourth position, an achievement in himself considering the background of the SF-25 on Saturdays of classification, a sanction of 3 positions fell like a deck. The commissioners determined that he had blocked Max Verstappen during one of his laps thrown. In a circuit like Monaco, where to advance is a chimera, such a penalty is not just a 3-position setback on the grille. It is, in many cases, a judgment of competitive irrelevance. This incident cannot be understood only from the regulatory. It has much deeper implications, because it reflects the operational fragility that Ferrari still drags in critical moments. It was not a rude mistake of Hamilton or a deliberate action. It was a synchronization failure, communication in the pit wall, of lack of tactical visibility. In a really cohesive structure, such errors are anticipated and neutralized in advance. But in Ferrari, there are still moments where coordination is broken, where pressure surpasses precision, and where the margin of error already minimally becomes an abyss. The sanction symbolizes much more than an infraction. It represents Ferrari's inability to shield his star pilot of contingencies that should be avoidable. It is not the first time something like this happens with Hamilton. In his last years in Mercedes, he also suffered failed penalties and strategies that moved him away from the podium. But here, in Ferrari, the expectation was different. Here, the change of air should translate into a more sharp, more efficient structure, more aware of the type of pilot they have behind the wheel. And yet, once again, reality was imposed. But there is another reading, even more symbolic. This penalty not only affected Hamilton, he also affected public perception about his relationship with Ferrari. Until that time, its classification in Monaco could have been interpreted as a turning point, proof that the SF-25 was evolving and that the Hamilton-Ferrari duo was finding its rhythm. But the sanction changed the narrative. What was a history of progress became, suddenly, in another chapter of frustration. And for a pilot like Hamilton, who is no longer in the stage of building his legacy but of consolidating it, these episodes matter. They are not just lost points, they are wasted opportunities to demonstrate that you can still win titles. And that weighs. In Monaco, more than anywhere else, the penalty was a metaphor of Ferrari's current dilemma. Even when they do many things well, something small, something apparently insignificant, can ruin everything. Lewis Hamilton's statements in Monaco, for more techniques and specific that seemed, contained a subtext that transcends the surface of sports analysis. They were not just reflections on a bad classification or specific criticisms to the behavior of the SF-25. They were, in essence, an encrypted message both for Ferrari and for the global Formula One. Hamilton spoke with a mixture of openness and diplomacy. He acknowledged that efforts are being made, that there are advances, and that the pilot-team relationship is in the process of maturation. But it also made it clear that the results are not up to what the situation demands. By saying that the team still works to find maximum performance is marking a dividing line between intention and execution. Because it is not enough to want to improve, you have to know how to do it and have the infrastructure and mentality necessary to execute that improvement without margin of error. These types of statements, coming from Hamilton, are not anecdotal. They are carefully designed to put pressure without breaking the internal ecosystem. He knows that he cannot set the environment from within, but also understands that a well-placed public message can accelerate processes, it can shake inertia. Especially in Ferrari, an organization that has historically reacted to external criticism than self-criticism. In that sense, his message goes far beyond the frustration of a failed Saturday. It is a strategic warning. He is saying, I am here to win, but I need an environment that operates with surgical precision. And that type of pressure, when it comes from someone with their trajectory, cannot be ignored. Hamilton is not a pilot in search of validation. He is an architect of winning projects. And his presence in Ferrari is, by definition, a constant demand for excellence. In addition, there is a second level in that message. One that questions fans, media, and especially the executives of the team. In Monaco, it was not only a track performance. It was credibility. Each failure, every sanction, every weakness exposed, a little more mined the perception that Ferrari can be the dominant giant that was in the past. And Hamilton, with his single presence, forces Ferrari to respond to that expectation not with promises, but with concrete facts.